Hey everyone, um, welcome to the live stream for migrating from OSS to Hasura Cloud. Um, so today we'll be talking about 1 second. Yeah. So today we'll be talking about migrating from OSS version of Hasura to Hasura Cloud. So if you're having Hasura hosted on a different vendor and your database Postgres being somewhere, you're running an app and you want to move to Hasura Cloud, we'll see how to do the migration process and why to do the migration in the first place, right? So just a little bit of intro about what Hasura Cloud is. Hasura Cloud is hosted Hasura, um, and it's basically part of your GraphQL infrastructure. So think of it as not managing your API layer and just giving it to Hasura, and we'll take care of scaling and monitoring and all of the other advanced features, right? And you get monitoring, regression test, rate limiting, and caching, and so on, right? So typically, if you are self-hosting Hasura, building all of these advanced features will be a lot of effort, and managing your operations. The infra of your hosting will be a little bit of pain, and like deciding when to scale and what the CPU or the RAM and the management of that will be a pain. So Hasura Cloud removes all of that out of the way, and you also get more advanced features to use, right? So today, the piece that we'll be replacing is where Hasura is being hosted. Everything else remains the same. So if you look at this, there is the GraphQL layer that's talking to Hasura, and Hasura talks to databases and APIs, right? So now the new thing would be GraphQL API will be through Hasura Cloud, and Hasura Cloud will communicate with the database and your APIs. So we're just replacing where Hasura is being hosted by taking away your hosting provider to Hasura Cloud, so that you can just not worry about managing the infra. So, so what's primarily required for this, if you're running your existing app, is to have the version of your Hasura setup for the latest one, um, to whatever Hasura Cloud is running in. And obviously, with any migration, it's better to just take backups of your schemas. Although Hasura doesn't touch your data part of it, Hasura just manages internal schemas in HTTP catalog and HTTP views and so on. It doesn't touch your public schema and so on. So, but anyway, it's just better practice to just take backups of your schema and your metadata, right? And you obviously need to migrate. You need the Postgres connection string uh, to connect to database. And finally, you might need to check for Postgres permissions, specifically for Hasura Cloud, to just allow one more access to a particular schema. But this shouldn't be an issue in your normal case. This should be probably an issue in your controlled environment where you are going to be giving access only to specific tables and specific schemas, right? Um, so let's look at the demo. So what I have right now is an existing Hasura setup, the OSS version of Hasura running. So if you look at the version, it's the latest 1.3.1. In case you're not running the latest version, the first step is to basically upgrade to the latest version so that Hasura Cloud and your OSS version is on the same version. Um, so I am running the latest version and I have like a schema I've just taken the Chinook schema for this demo. This just basically has tables like albums, artists, tracks, and actors, and so on, right? So, and also has a bunch of relationships and metadata, right, for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to show you what are the other configurations that are part of this. So I also have like a event triggered setup to call a particular endpoint when a new album is created. So we'll also see how to migrate additional configuration apart from just the schema of your Postgres database. So if you want to know where this is running, this is currently running on DigitalOcean. This GraphQL engine instance is a DigitalOcean server, but the database is hosted on Google Cloud. So I can just quickly show you the Google Cloud information. There's a Postgres version 12 is running, and I have allowed access to my DigitalOcean server to give authorization to access this. And if you remember, I've just written a blog post about this to on how to do this migration. And we're just going to go over how to use the same database on Google Cloud and then create a project on Hasura Cloud, right? So this Google Cloud project is already configured with the OSS version, and this is what you're seeing here. So all of the events and the data and all the configuration is already on the Google Cloud database, right? So we're not going to recreate the database from scratch. We're just going to migrate the Hasura instance from DigitalOcean to Hasura Cloud. To probably just quickly show you the DigitalOcean setup. So I have the one-click integration running, but the difference here is that I don't have Postgres set up. I've just given the connection string for the database URL, which is just Postgres followed by the username and password and the IP of the Google Cloud interface. And then you have the database name, right? So, and a bunch of other URLs and admin secret and env variables, right? So this is just primarily Hasura running and served by the CADI interface. Right? So I can just do Docker PS. You can see there's GraphQL engine, the OSS version of GraphQL engine running here. There's no Postgres here, and Postgres is connected to Google Cloud, right? So that's the DigitalOcean setup. And if I also can show you the local development setup, I have the Hasura directory, which is initiated by the CLI. You have the metadata and migrations set up here, right? So I have a migration file for the entire schema, which is the app.sql, and there's also metadata for all of your information like the tables and the actions and so on, right? So I have all of this set up for a typical OSS app that's hosted. So this could be like your staging or your production environment. It doesn't matter, but the idea is that you're running the open source version somewhere, and you want to just migrate to Hasura Cloud, right? So now I'm actually just going to check out the comments to see if there are any interesting questions. Hey Vishwa's joined in. Right. Cool. So what I'm going to do is the next step is to show you how to like quickly take backups if in case something goes wrong. So Hasura has pgdump API. So if I just go to API reference, I can just do the pgdump API. So what this does is it just lets you take a Postgres schema dump with this configuration. So you just send a post request to the GraphQL, the v1 alpha 1 pg dump API, REST API endpoint of the same GraphQL server that you're running. And this will give you the SQL output that you want to take a backup of. This is mostly optional, and because since Hasura Cloud or Hasura doesn't touch your public schema or the other schemas that you're working on. But just like a precautionary step, it's just better to take a backup. The second step is to take a metadata export. I already have the metadata already, but in case you want to do an export, this is the CLI command that you'll be using. So this will take the latest version of the metadata from the server to your local version Git version control system, right? So these are the two steps that you will start off with as a precaution. Once you have the backup ready, the next step is to take the Postgres connection string. So if I go back to the Google Cloud interface, I know that there is a DigitalOcean server which has been configured. Now, to get this database URL, I can actually go back to my DigitalOcean server where I've just configured the database URL. So this is the database URL for communicating with Google Cloud SQL. Currently, this is not using any Cloud SQL proxies. This is using the public IP way of accessing. And I've just given access to DigitalOcean server. So now let's go to Hasura Cloud. And I'm just going to click on new project. And in this case, we want to enter the Postgres database URL. So I'm just going to paste this from what I've copied from the DigitalOcean setup. Right. So I have the Postgres connection string up and running here. And it also says that I need to allow connections to the database from Hasura Cloud IP. So this is the Hasura Cloud IP that is there for my project that I need to give access to for Google Cloud, right? So I'm going to add a network. I'm just going to call this Hasura Cloud. I'm just going to paste this IP, and I'm just going to save this. So all right, I'm just going to refresh this. There's probably some cache issues. So what we're doing basically is adding, just telling Google Cloud SQL that please authorize this network of Hasura Cloud to be able to access the database. So just giving this IP again, just going to click on save. We already have the DigitalOcean thing configured, so now we're adding Hasura Cloud as well. So once this is set up, what we can do is we can just continue with the project creation step, and ideally what should happen is the Hasura Cloud instance will be configured to work with this instance of Postgres. Right, we're just going to wait for a few more seconds for this configuration, and the update is done. So I'm just going to go to this cloud setup. So now this has been configured. My database URL has been set. I'm just going to click on create project. So the project has been initialized now. So what's happening right now is Hasura Cloud instance has been provisioned in a region. Right now it's in the US, but you'll be able to select multiple regions going forward. So what this does is it lets you, so once this is provisioned, it lets you configure different stuff about your Hasura instance, and then you can start accessing the console, right? So right now it says the GraphQL engine metadata is inconsistent. You can resolve it through the console. So I'm just going to click on resolve metadata to see what the issue is. If you remember, we've just created a fresh instance of Hasura Cloud, but we've not configured anything else from the previous instance of DigitalOcean, right? So if I can see the metadata status, it says that I have an event trigger for which an environment variable is missing, right? So obviously the next step is to migrate all the environment variables that are there from our previous setup. So I'm going to go to my DigitalOcean setup to see the different environment variables being used. So quickly going back to this existing OSS setup. I'm going to go to the album event trigger, and it looks like the webhook URL is coming from an environment variable. And obviously, since this is not configured, Hasura Cloud is not able to technically access it, right? So I'm just going to copy this URL. I've just given a dummy HTTP bin URL for the webhook. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to configure this as part of the environment variable. I'm just going to click on new environment variable, and let's call this album webhook URL. And I'm just going to give this value. So as soon as I do it, this configuration will be applied to the instance, and hopefully this should resolve the metadata issue if this was the only one. So far what we've done is we've done whitelisting of the IP for the database, and we're just configuring Hasura Cloud instance to work with the Postgres database. So there's nothing that's new that's required on the database side, because the database is still running and working with the existing Hasura instance, right, on DigitalOcean. Right, so now that I've configured this new environment variable for the webhook, the metadata issue is gone. So the perfect configuration is here. I'm able to launch console and like access this, right? So now the next step is to obviously configure the other environment variables. Like for example, I have to quickly secure this app with an admin secret. So I'm just going to go ahead and add an admin secret. And so this should quickly set a secret so that nobody else can access the console. And apart from that, we have another variable called unauthorized role public. So I'm going to have to set this as well. So right now I'm just doing this manually one by one to showcase how is this going to work. But in a CI/CD environment, if you're having a lot of environment variables, what you can actually do is you can use the API that Hasura Cloud exposes, and then apply these environment variables through the API. So I'm just going to go to the API setup, the API reference um, for updating the env variables. So this is the GraphQL mutation, where you will actually set to give the tenant ID in the current hash, which you will get from a different GraphQL query. Once you get that value, you will be able to just update the tenants environment variables, right? So typically this will be like an array of key value pairs, and let's say you have a complicated app with a lot of environment variables. You'll be typically using this API in a simple script, which can just export from your current vendor. So ideally, if you're using Docker Compose, you can also define environment variables through an env file, and then import this. And a simple script can just basically export through this mutation, which will just create off all the environment variables in the configuration, right? So what we've done so far is we've just quickly migrated an instance of the OSS instance of Hasura to Hasura Cloud. But if you realize what's happening right now, both the instances are live. The Hasura OSS version is also live on the same database, and you also have this Hasura.app URL, which is the cloud URL, right? So this is happening because at the end of the day, Hasura just reads the metadata that's available on the internal schemas, and it's able to like read that these are the tables which are being tracked, and these are the APIs that I need to provide, and these are the events that are being configured with Hasura Cloud, right? So because I've added my admin secret, I'm not able to log in, so I'm just going to give the admin secret. So once I do this setup, I can just quickly show you the events. I've added my event trigger here. So I've not explicitly applied or created anything new on this instance. What I've just done is I've just pointed my existing Postgres database to this new Hasura Cloud instance. So you can run as many instances in different regions uh, possible, connected to the same database, as long as you're able to ensure that the versions are the same. Right now, which is the latest version is 1.3.1, and so even if your OSS version is running on 1.3.1, it can coexist and run at the same time. But why, right? So you can once you do this, what you can do is you can actually set up that this is my old configuration. I can probably click on reload metadata and log in back again. So what you can also do is as a setup for the Pro metrics, you can do configurations for monitoring, and you can do um, rate limiting and so on. So for this, I need to log in with my Hasura Cloud account. So I'm just waiting for the validation to complete, and here you go. All right. So what you're seeing here is the Hasura console, the Pro tab, the metrics tab for you. So this will give you a rough view of what the queries, mutations going around, the connections going around, uh, and the usage data across your app, right? You can like drill down on different errors and the different WebSocket connections that are open and the subscription workers that are there. So the idea here is you can set up advanced production ready features like for performance and reliability and security, right? So I'm just going to make a simple query from my graphical interface to say query, let's say albums, ID, and probably the title. I'm also going to get the tracks in the same query. Yeah, so I've got a bunch of this details. I'm not going to limit, unfortunately, limit the number of albums I'm going to fetch. So now, after some point of time in Pro tab, you should start seeing these queries come up. So if I go to usage, I should start seeing these operations come up here, and I can start debugging if there's something going wrong and so on, right? So that's one of the monitoring features of Hasura Cloud. So with your the open source version, this tab won't be available for you, and which means that you have to set up all of this monitoring and rate limiting and so on your own, which is slightly a lot of effort, right? So I'm going to go to wrap up my environment variable setup. So I'm just going to log in back to my DigitalOcean setup. DC Hasura, Docker Compose. I have my unauthorized role uh, set up public, and this is enabled on a dev mode, which is not recommended in production. So I'm just not going to add that variable here. And typically, you will disable console in production if you're running an OSS version. But in this case, you can just add your team members and then give the right access control rules, which means that they can access only the graphical part of the app, or just manage a schema, or just access your Pro tab, right? So there are different granular permissions that you can configure uh, to give access, right? So the next step is since let's say you have actually hosted this in a production environment where you will obviously have like a custom domain set up. So you will probably be running into adding a new domain. So you can just create off a custom domain. Let's say it's myapp.com. And what you can do is you can just configure your CNAME on your DNS provider with this configuration. And once you do this, uh, you will be able to access your GraphQL endpoint on this URL, obviously with Vue GraphQL, and you can also configure if you want to expose other REST APIs and so on with the additional configuration with the env, right? So I think that would be around enabled APIs. So here you'll be able to say whether you want to expose the GraphQL API or the metadata API and so on. In production, ideally, you just want to expose the GraphQL API and not worry about the metadata config and the pgdump API, right? So this is another configuration that you can add in production. So this is ideally recommended for any instance, whether it's an OSS instance or a Hasura Cloud instance, right? So this is a quick demo of what we've done. Is a quick demo of what staging server to a production Hasura Cloud instance looks like. Um, so you can also like switch URLs on your client depending on what the change in the URL is. So this is just an IP, but just assuming that this is a custom domain and you've moved it to a different app URL, you can change your app URLs on the front, right? So that's roughly the migration process. You just need to ensure the versions are the same, and you just need to ensure the Postgres permissions are there. So, for example, if you're in a controlled environment where you need to require specific permissions for specific rules, um, if you're already running Hasura open source version, you would have given permissions for some of the core internal schemas, like the HTTP catalog and the HTTP views and so on. But let's say you are also now hosting Hasura Cloud. In this case, you will be also now giving access to HTTP, the Pro catalog, so that Hasura Cloud can actually start working for the Pro tab of your app to start giving you metrics. Now, if I can look at this, it gives me metrics about how many queries have been made and how much success rate and so on, right? So the last time I made a couple of queries, it should start popping up in my usage tab. I can click on action. I can inspect the individual requests. Um, so if you look at this query, this was made from the Hasura console, obviously. And this is exactly the query that I made from the graphical interface. So this kind of granular monitoring of queries and the session variables being used, and you can also like read on what the generated SQL looks like, give it to the database admin, and optimize for Postgres performance, right? And you'll also like get the response size and the response time, the query time, right? So the execution time for your queries and optimize accordingly. Cool. So the next step I wanted to show is how do you actually start from scratch on a local dev to Hasura Cloud. Is that you typically have a Docker Compose setup locally. So I'm just going to go to Hasura.io docs. So open my Docker instance. So with your local setup, you will probably use a Docker Compose version. Here you will run Hasura OSS version and Postgres on your local machine. So once you have this setup running, you'll obviously have um, your migrations and metadata on your local machine, which you can then start applying to Hasura Cloud, right? So the difference between what we've done so far from the DigitalOcean server to this one is from a local environment is the additional step is to obviously migrate off the database as well. from your local machine to the cloud instance. So that is where I think a step like the PG dump and the PG restore and the setup of metadata will be more applicable. So typically, what you can do in your um, project setup on a local Hasura project, which is generated by the CLI, you will typically do Hasura migrate apply, and you will also give the endpoint, which is um, the Hasura Cloud GraphQL endpoint, right? So this is the first step where you will just do a migrate apply, and once you do this, you'll also obviously apply the metadata. So once you do these two steps, your local instance of the schema and the metadata can be just applied to a cloud instance, which is on a different database, and you can keep syncing between your local version and the cloud Hasura Cloud version, right? So that's the local setup that you typically use. We can go over setting up everything from scratch uh, on a different stream where you will set up Docker Compose on your local machine. You start creating tables, and what if you mess up something, and how do you squash migrations, and so on. So that's definitely for a different stream. It'll be exciting to walk you through over the local development workflow, and then moving off to staging. What we've done right now in this stream is primarily about moving an existing working version of Hasura to Hasura Cloud, so that you can start uh, not worrying about managing your infra, right? So right now, my DigitalOcean instance that's running, which is hosting Hasura Cloud, which is hosting Hasura OSS version. I'll have to manage my infra, and I have to, like, if there is a sudden rush of requests, I need to start scaling the mission. I have to upgrade the RAM and CPU, which I don't need to worry about with Hasura Cloud, because Hasura Cloud takes care of that auto scaling business for you, and it becomes like the invisible GraphQL layer behind the scenes, whereas you will just basically concentrate on building the app rather than building the infrastructure around the app, right? So that's primarily what why you would want to actually migrate to Hasura Cloud. Apart from obviously the pro features that I mentioned, you can set up monitoring and rate limiting and so on. But that's all additional. This is the primary piece is also about not managing your infra totally, right? So that's mostly what I wanted to show you in this example. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop in on the chat, or um, always available on Discord. You can feel free to drop in your comments, and do let us know if the migration process is smooth for you, and if you're facing some issues, we're happy to help. And just ensure the following prerequisites. I'll just go back to this slide. You'll just have to again ensure that the versions are same. So what is another thing that you need to notice is that if you have migrated to Hasura Cloud, don't bother downgrading to a different version on your OSS instance, or just basically nuke the OSS instance that's running. You don't need that running anywhere. The important bit is to just maintain the version of Hasura the same if there are multiple instances running. But ideally, I would just recommend nuking the OSS instance. Once you've tested the setup, once you've tested the migration is working, you can just close down the server which is running on a different vendor, right? So that's typically what the migration process looks like. You also have custom domains set up, so everything can be set up here before actually making a migration on the front end. With custom domains, you obviously don't need to change anything on the front end as well, because the URLs will continue to work the same way once the DNS propagates. So as long as that is happening, you can keep the existing version of the OSS running in the background, and then you can nuke it whenever, and then it should, and then the new custom domain configuration with Hasura Cloud should start propagating for existing users. Um, and another pro feature that you will want to use after migrating to Hasura Cloud is a regression test. So you'll want to create new operations. Let's say you're changing schemas between different deployments. You want to ensure that there is nothing breaking. You want to ensure that the queries or mutations which were running previously continues to work. And if something is breaking, you'll be able to run this test before applying this deployment to production. So this will be applicable in the step between moving from staging to before production. So the regression test will be pretty useful to just catch any breaking changes before going live. So this is another pro feature that you'll be using with Hasura Cloud pretty frequently before every deployment, right? So uh, that's another thing to watch out for. Uh, Obviously, you'll also have configurations for rate limiting. You can limit the number of requests per minute, but the interesting bit is also that you can limit requests based on a particular user's ID or a particular IP address, right? So, for example, I can add multiple user IDs and then just restrict access to a particular set of trial users to not allow them access to more than a few requests per minute. So this opens up a lot of use cases, and so this is another interesting feature to watch out for. Obviously, at the global level, you can also declare what's the depth limit for each operation, how deep your GraphQL query can go. So that is something that can be configured globally. And you also have unique parameters that you can configure using session variables. So this could be any access session variable, not just the user ID. It could be any variable that comes in, and Hasura will be able to limit number of requests, right? So this is another interesting feature. Once you move to Hasura Cloud, you'll be configuring them uh, for production ready scenario, right? And let's say you've been using GraphQL subscriptions, and let's say your app is a real-time app. You'll obviously be using subscriptions that Hasura gives you. So what this can be used is for the Pro tab. You also have WebSockets that you can monitor. So if the number of connections, what are the number of connections which are open, and how many people are connected to the WebSocket, and what are the different roles being connected to, and the instances, right? So this becomes pretty easy to just capture, right? So that's another top level feature that you want to have a note on, right? So that's roughly what I wanted to cover for today. Um, if there are any questions on YouTube chat, I don't think so. So I'm just going to wrap up this stream. So feel free to drop in your comments when if you have issues during the migration. We are available on Discord. You can pop up on Intercom, and we'll be able to help you out with the migration process. It's going to be pretty simple. Um, if you have an existing database, Hasa just connects to your database, and then everything should start working. There is just a couple of nuances to look out for with Hasura Cloud, and you should be pretty good to go, right, with the migration. All right. I think if there aren't any questions, I am gonna wrap up the stream and say thank you for joining in, and see you soon.